This is Join Us in France, episode 206. Bonjour, I'm Annie, and Join Us in France is the podcast where we talk about France, its many quirks, its history, its language, and of course, destinations in France you want to learn about because hopefully you'll be visiting soon. On today's episode, a great conversation with Lacklan Cooke about doing the Tour of the Mont Blanc. This is an active vacation. It's not super technical, but it sounds like you need to be in good shape to do this. It's like a long hike around the Mont Blanc. Most people can pull it off, but some will do it faster than others. Lacklan gives us great tips about where you can stay, how you can prepare, and all of that good stuff. If you're interested in learning more about the Mont Blanc and organizing your visit to the Alps area, you should also check out 3 more episodes. Episode 56, called French Alps and Provence Tours, where my guest, Cynthia, talks about the places she takes people to explore the Alps. She's no longer doing those tours, so you can't sign up for those now, but she still gives excellent information about where you can go. Other one you can listen to is episode 121 on Chamonix, Annecy, and the Alps. That's with Katie and Nathan. And episode 83 with Matt on Provence and Chamonix. And of course, this one coming up today. Show notes and photos for this episode are on joinusinfrance.com/206, the number 206. There won't be an episode next week because I'll be on a tour with a small group of listeners around the Dordogne. I'm really looking forward to that, and I will get back behind the microphone on October 3rd, 2018. Join Us in France needs your support. To see all the ways you can support the show, visit joinusinfrance.com/support. And speaking of support, the best way to support the show is through Patreon. I have a very bold goal to reach 200 patrons by the end of the year, and your help is needed. Bonjour, Lacklan, and welcome to Join Us in France.
Bonjour, Annie.
How are you today?
I'm doing fine, and aloha from Honolulu.
Ooh, nice. Is it very warm in Honolulu today?
It is quite warm today.
Yeah, in France too. It's like 37 or something. So it's like 95. And
okay, we're not that warm.
Yeah, and it's been muggy too, so it's good to have air conditioning. That's all I gotta say. Yes. All right, so today we are going to talk about something that you did that I knew nothing about, but I wanted to talk about because I'm interested in active vacations that people take in France. As a matter of fact, we've had a few episodes before. 3 of them talked about the Paris Marathon, the Bordeaux Marathon. Actually, it's called the Marathon du Médoc. We talked about cycling in France with champion Marion Cligné. We talked about cycling in France with people who are not champions, but very willing and very eager. Anyway, we've had several episodes, and I'll put links to those in the show notes for this episode if you're interested in that. But to me, it's fascinating that people come to France to do sports. It's great.
Yes, and Tour du Mont Blanc is a great walk.
Yes, the long walk. So tell us a little bit about yourself, about your visits to France, why you chose to do this particular activity and all of that.
Okay, well, growing up, my parents wanted us to speak another language, so we were moved to France from 10 to 12 years old and lived in Paris at Place Saint-Sulpice.
Wow.
And I commuted to school in Antony at École Nouvelle d'Antony, and it was a real French school. It was not a bilingual school.
Uh-huh.
And so we pretty much had to sink or swim, and after a couple years of that, we spoke fairly good French.
Wow, I bet.
And so then as an adult, I decided that I should capitalize on all this and started coming back to France and doing stuff. And what inspired me to find the Tour du Mont Blanc was I had done the Camino de Santiago, which for those of you not familiar, you walk from the French Pyrenees on the French route. You start in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, which is right above Bayonne, and you walk all the way across the top of Spain to Santiago de Compostela, which is about 500 miles.
Right.
So I was looking for something else to do that maybe wasn't quite that long. And the Tour du Mont Blanc came up as an option and is widely viewed as one of the best walks in Europe.
Wow. It's not as famous as Compostela.
No.
Right.
And the Camino de Santiago is reaching the point where it's a little bit of a madhouse now with 250 to 300,000 people a year doing the Camino.
Wow. And did you do the whole Camino or just a part of it?
I did, but what I did, and I would encourage people to think about this if they're doing the Camino, was I did it in stages. So I walked for a couple weeks or so, and then I ended up, originally I planned to do the whole thing, but it didn't work out that way. But I walked a few weeks, and then I went off and did something else. And then the next time I came, I started where I left off and walked another couple weeks. So I did the whole Camino in 3 separate trips, 2 of them walking, 1 of them bicycling.
Wow. Wow, and so just to compare the two, was the Camino harder physically or was the Tour du Mont Blanc harder physically?
I would say that Tour du Mont Blanc was harder in a briefer duration. It's a little like comparing a marathon to a sprint because the Camino goes on and on and on. Imagine doing, say, half a marathon every day for 35 days in a row.
Yeah.
That's the Camino. The Tour du Mont Blanc, it's sort of all over in 8 or 10 days, but there's some pretty intense 8 or 10 days.
And I think you have a blog about your adventures, right?
Yes, I basically set up a blog for each of these kind of trips. The most recent was I rode from Paris to Normandy to Mont Saint-Michel on the Vélo Scénic in September.
Vélo Scénic.
Yes.
I don't know about that one either.
Okay.
Well, that's fun. That's fun. That's a long way. That's probably, 300 kilometers, 400 kilometers?
Yeah, it's well laid out. I did find that I did it in the fall in September. And what I found was towards the late afternoons, I was just getting rained on like crazy. Right. So after about 5 days or so, I found that it was very convenient to take the bike and hop on the train and skip a little bit of it.
Yeah, in Normandy, the problem is always the rain. I mean, for most people, that's how it goes. All right, so let's talk about your adventures on the Mont Blanc. I'm just very curious because you're the first person I talked to who's done this. Okay,
well, let's first be clear. The Tour du Mont Blanc is actually circling Mont Blanc, walking around it, not climbing up it.
Okay.
So Mont Blanc is the tallest mountain in Western Europe at 4,807 meters or 15,771 feet.
Okay.
And it was first climbed in 1767 by Jacques Balmat and Dr. Michael Picard. And the Tour du Mont Blanc is approximately 170 kilometers, and you gain about 32,800 feet in altitude.
Wow, that's a lot.
And the first guy to do this was Professor Horace Benedict de Saussure in 1758.
So he did that before anybody climbed it.
Yes, because it was easier to go around it than go up it.
Very interesting. And so because it goes around, do you stop and start and stop in the same spot? Yeah, basically the typical day, most people do it counterclockwise or anti-clockwise, as the British say. And typically people start in Chamonix because that's an easy place to get to, and it's well set up to get yourself going. And then your basic day is to walk most of the day. Usually you walk up some kind of col or pass and then down the other side into the next valley. And there's usually a town that you stay the night in. There are plenty of alpine huts and refuges.
I did not actually stay at them, but I found them convenient for eating lunch or taking a break.
Mm-hmm. So these are wide open. If it's like in the Pyrenees, it's wide open. You can just go crash for the night. There's no real beds or anything. It's right.
No, these ones actually have kitchens and they have beds, but it varies widely. I looked at one and it was. To me, it looked pretty grim. They had a whole bunch of mattresses side by side, and they were kind of sleeping 4 people on a mattress. And I wasn't quite up for that. But there are other ones, like there's one right outside of Courmayeur called the Refugio Bonatti that looks like a very modern hotel. And some of them do have private rooms. So you can call ahead and try to reserve a private room. You can take your chances. There are options.
How many people do you think walk this path?
I think it's quite popular in August when all Europeans have their holidays. So if you do decide to go in August, you probably want to make some arrangements. The basic walking season for the Tour du Mont Blanc is mid to late June, and it depends on the season because of snow cover until towards the end of September. So my advice would be to go either sort of late June, early July, or to go in September because then you can miss the crowds.
Fewer people.
Yes.
Are there enough of these hotels or refuges for you to find one or several a day?
Yeah, usually you'll pass one sort of lunchtime-ish and then be able to either stay and call it a day or go on and be in a town for dinner.
I see.
So there's some choices. And one thing on the Tour du Mont Blanc, I should say that the way marking is very well done. There are a lot of signs, and I think, Annie, I sent you some pictures that maybe you can put one up. And the signs on the Tour du Mont Blanc tend to give you the time, the average walking time to get somewhere rather than the distance. And the reason that's important is because what you find pretty quickly is how much altitude you're gaining has much more to do with how long it's going to take you than how far it is.
Sure. If it's very steep, obviously, you're not quite as fast. And did you find places to buy food every day? Or did you have to pack food for several days?
Yes. No, you don't need to pack food. You don't need to pack a tent or a stove or anything like that. So that's wonderful. And typically I bought a piece of sausage and some cheese in Chamonix. And that, of course, lasted several days, and you could have some of that on the trail. I tended not to eat a big lunch because you're walking, but you try to finish your walking day sort of by 3:30 or 4. And usually, so for instance, the first day I walked from Les Houches to Les Contamines Montjoie, and I had booked a hotel, I think, on booking.com on the fly. And typically the hotels along the route will include a demi-pension where you end up eating dinner and breakfast as part of your hotel rate.
Yeah. And the food was pretty good?
Yeah, the food was good. It varied a bit. It was not, I would say it was not generally fabulous.
Right.
I'd like to make a quick asterisk and say that I have a couple recommendations of places to try in Chamonix. And Chamonix is a great town. And I would recommend, if you're planning to do the Tour du Mont Blanc, that you plan to spend a day in Chamonix before you launch, because that'll give you a chance to catch your breath.
Right, because if you're coming from North America, you have the problem of jet lag.
Chamonix is about 3,400 feet, and it's fun to go up the Aiguille du Midi, which is the big lift that takes you way up, but be careful because that's at something like 12,000 feet. And I did it immediately on arrival and found that after about an hour up there, I was a little dizzy and needed to get back down. Yeah. That's very fast. It takes you up fast. Exactly.
Right. Okay. So on your blog, you will have all the stops that you took, right? You'll have all the details.
Yes. So typically, for instance, the first day you will take the bus down to Les Houches and take a lift up if you want to, and it saves you 2 hours of hard slogging uphill. And then you'll walk all day long, and you end up in Les Contamines Montjoie, which is a nice little alpine hamlet with a few places to stay and a cafe and a cheese shop and, some things to do.
And a place for apéro, right?
Yeah. The hotel has a lovely outdoor area you can sit in, and they were very nice. Mm-hmm. And I think it was about 85 euros or something. It was not terribly expensive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Especially if it includes breakfast and some dinner.
And dinner, yeah. And then from there, when I was there, they offered to drive those of us who were staying at the hotel up the road to the launching point for the next stage. So essentially, instead of us walking an hour alongside the road, they just ran us up to the top of the town.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, so they're very familiar with this. And then the second day on the Tour du Mont Blanc is the toughest, because that day you do 4,000 feet up and 3,000 feet down. And you end up in a little hamlet called Les Chapieux. And Les Chapieux is essentially 2 or 3 buildings, maybe a few more, and not much else. And also no internet and no cell phone coverage.
Right. So there maybe you need to reserve in advance.
Yep. You probably want to reserve in advance there.
Right.
There are people who bring a tent and camp, but my advice would be not to, because it's extra weight and you don't need to do it.
Right. So you brought enough clothes for your 8 days, 10 days?
The secret to this is to use wool T-shirts, which don't get smelly and keep you warm even if they get wet. And the advantage of these new high-tech wool T-shirts is you can wash them in the sink in the evening and hang them up, and they'll be dry by morning.
Wow.
So you can sort of rotate through them and not be in a bad way, shall we say.
Yeah, you take 3 or 4 T-shirts and some underwear and some shorts maybe.
More like 2.
Oh, yeah.
The general guideline is you want to keep your pack weight to about 10% of your body weight.
Okay.
So if you weigh like 200 pounds like I do, you want to be sort of under 20 pounds.
Right.
Because otherwise it really weighs on you. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And while we're talking about that, I should mention that somehow my pack magically ended up weighing like 30 pounds, and it was too much. So I found a service that will transfer your luggage for you. Oh. And another way to do this, which might be good for a lot of people, is just to bring a suitcase and plan to have it transferred, and then you can just wear a day pack. And
that's pretty good.
Yeah, the transfer is a little expensive, but it really makes the walk more pleasant. It's called Taxi Besson, Besson, and they have a website, and you can fill in what day and where you want your suitcase picked up and where you want it to go. And I found that they were very reliable. Yes. And
so that's the expensive way. Define how, expensive, more or less.
Okay, well, there are several ways to do this, and that's sort of the low expense, but more expensive than carrying everything else. So Taxi Besson, if I recall correctly, charges about 35 euros a day to move your bag. So that's not cheap.
Yeah.
But a lot of people, I'm going to suggest that if you're not someone who really enjoys making a lot of arrangements yourself, you can hire a company which will essentially arrange what's called an unguided tour. And what they do is they book all your hotels for you, arrange your luggage transfer, and give you a tour book that tells you where you need to go each day. Mm-hmm. And I ran into some people who were doing this, and I must say I was very impressed with the organization. And I'm pretty good at researching hotels, and I was ending up in the same hotels they were. Uh-huh. So the name of that outfit that they were using, and there are plenty that do this, but I'll mention that one because I thought it did a good job. Mm-hmm. It was called Alpine Hikers, and I think that their website is alpinehikers.com or something.
Okay. Interesting.
And then I'll mention one other site for people who are kind of, they want to do it themselves, but they need a little help with the arrangements. There's a woman named Brittany Haas who lives in Munich, and she has a company called alpenventuresunguided.com, alpenventuresunguided.com, and she'll arrange custom tours and huts and stuff like that for you. and she has a bunch of videos on how to use mountain huts and things like that. So that might be a useful resource for people.
Yeah, that would be, wouldn't it? Yeah, and it's good that you have options to not carry everything yourself.
Yes.
Because, I mean, if you're a young, very young person, probably that's okay. But, as you get older, it gets hard to walk with much of a pack.
Which brings up a good point. I was just rereading my blog entries, and this is a very physical hike. So if you're planning to do this and you've been sitting at a desk for the last 10 years, this is not something you can just show up and do. Mm-hmm. You'll want to spend some time climbing some hills and getting in some pretty good shape. And if you're going to be carrying your pack, be sure to practice with your pack.
Right.
The other thing you definitely want to bring is some poles, or you can buy them in Chamonix. But for the descents, especially when you're carrying a pack, it's really nice to have some poles to take the weight off your knees.
Yeah. Was it cold?
It was a little chilly at times. Typically in the mornings, it would be chilly before the sun came up, and sometimes you were in a valley in the shade. And then as you got moving, you'd warm up. Mm-hmm. And then, in the evenings when the sun goes down at altitude, it gets quite chilly.
Yeah.
So my advice for everyone is that a puffy jacket ends up being a great thing because it's not very heavy and it keeps you quite warm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Are there a lot of bugs?
I didn't see any bugs at all. Mm-hmm. The one thing you will want is some rain gear, because you can get up and kind of into the fogs and clouds and it's kind of wet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm looking at your list of equipment. Local sim, Even if nowadays people, like American companies, offer data plans for not very much.
Yeah, that would be fine. I'm just pointing out that it's helpful to have some way to book a hotel ahead.
Yeah. Or
something like that. The latest thing I found for people, especially going to France, that I think is a great deal and you can put a link, Annie, on Amazon. There's something called the Orange Holiday Sim. And it gives you 14 days with 10 gigabytes of data. And when you buy it, it's $56. But the reason I like it is you can buy it ahead of time on Amazon. So you're not fooling with it when you arrive. Mm-hmm. And then it's $56 initially, but you can recharge it for $20 for another 14 days. And once you put a recharge on, it's good for 6 months. Wow. So if you're like me, where you go to France fairly frequently, you can put some money on it and keep it alive for your next trip.
Interesting. That's very good. But that gives you a local number.
It does. Yeah, so what I do is I just have a second phone that has that in it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay.
So I carry 2 phones. The other thing I would recommend people think about, I found it useful. It's not a must-do, but there are many offline mapping programs, meaning you save the maps ahead of time and you can use the GPS without having to have a cellular connection. Mm-hmm. And if you search around the web, you can find the tracks or the trail marks for the Tour du Mont Blanc and load it into your phone. So when you're walking along and wondering how far away from the next town you are, or am I on the right trail, you can pull it out and check that you're doing the right thing.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah, I found it useful, and an online mapping program is a couple of dollars, and then you have it. Yeah. And then the tracks were free, so it's not a big investment if you already have a phone.
Right.
The one thing people might not think of that I really think you should bring is some slippers, like rubber slippers or Crocs or something, because if you stay in any of the huts and even some of the hotels, they will not let you in the door in your muddy boots. Uh-huh. So that's something you need. And I stayed in a hotel. You'll really notice the difference when you arrive in Switzerland, because they're very strict there. And they actually have a boot closet outside of the hotel. Mm-hmm. And Madame who runs the hotel will not let you in the door with your boots on.
So you need to bring some sort of shoe. Flip-flops, maybe. I mean.
Yeah, flip-flops are fine. Just something to wear in the evening that's not your boots.
Yeah. Oh, very good. So you do go through all 3 countries.
You do. So on day let's see, you leave Chamonix, and the first day you're in Les Contamines Montjoie. The next day you're in Les Chapieux. And then there are various alternatives, but essentially what I did was I walked to Refugio Elisabetta and had lunch there. Mm-hmm. And it was early enough in the day that I decided to continue. And by walking down to the nearest town, which was La Miage, you could hop a taxi from the nearest town into Courmayeur. And Courmayeur is the Italian sort of side that's like Chamonix, only the Italian version.
Huh.
So it's a full resort town with all the things you would want.
That's cool. It's pretty, I suppose.
Yeah, it's very nice. And I'd recommend if you're sore after your first 3 or 4 days, take a day off in Courmayeur. And you can take a lift up to the top of that side of the Alps, and it's absolutely spectacular.
Cool. Wow. That sounds really good.
Yeah. And then from there, you'll hike out of Courmayeur and you'll go up the side of the hill and then along what's called a balcony trail. And the balcony trails will kind of become your favorites because essentially you're walking along the side of the mountain and you're looking down into the valley.
That's got to be pretty.
And it's absolutely spectacular.
Yeah. Yeah. And at that point, you're in Switzerland. Oh, no, in Italy. In Italy.
You have to go, if you're in Italy, you have to go over another pass to get into Switzerland. Amazingly enough, you don't really see much on the ground indicating it. But when you get to your hotel or wherever you're staying, you sure notice the difference. So in Switzerland, every wood pile is stacked as if it were some precision thing. And, everything's very by the book. In Italy, things are much more relaxed and laid back.
And in France, it depends, right?
Yeah, and in France, it depends.
Yeah, well, that's the charm of, it's amazing that you change countries. I'm assuming there's no, border crossing or anything like that.
Nope, nothing like that at all.
Yeah. Nobody's going to ask you for your passport or your
not at all.
visa or something. Right. Speaking of visa, not the same visa, but did most of these places take credit cards or did you have to carry a lot of cash?
No, most of the places did take credit cards. I think Les Chapieux didn't because it's not online. But what I found often was that I could use Booking.com and pay through the Booking.com app, and then I didn't really have to do much when I was there.
Right. And I'll give you links to the hotels that you recommend on the website because, it's really, you've done the research. You've been there yourself. You can tell us if it's good or not.
Yes, and the hotels were quite nice, and I didn't think exorbitantly expensive. I would budget, say, in the order of 125, I think, was one of the more expensive ones, and maybe 85 was one of the lower ones, and that often included breakfast and dinner, but not always.
Not always, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not a super expensive kind of,
No, if you do it yourself and make the arrangements, it's cheaper. If you have alpine hikers or Brittany at Alpine Ventures do it, you'll pay more because they're doing all the legwork for you.
Yeah. They're doing a ton of work for you. So that makes sense.
Yes. And Chamonix is fantastic as a place to visit, and it's really well set up for outdoor activities. So if this whole TMB thing sounds like it might be a little too much for you, go to Chamonix and do some of the hikes. And what you find in Chamonix is that you can take a bus up the valley to almost anywhere, take a chairlift up, do a section of the trail, which will take you to another chairlift, which will drop you back down. And then you'll either be in Chamonix or you can take a bus back to town.
Right. So you could even do it even if you're not, even if you don't want to walk more than a few miles a day.
Yeah. And you can do a few sections and say, oh, I like this, or this isn't my cup of tea.
Yeah. Or if you're doing it with kids, maybe,
right.
They might not want to walk as much as you do. It depends.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And for instance, I didn't do the last 2 stages because my final 2 days, it was just pouring rain and you couldn't see anything. And I did 1 day like that and it just wasn't worth going back and doing more.
Yeah.
So next month in September, I'm going to Lyon and then Annecy and then Chamonix, and I'll go back and take the lifts up and do those final 2 stages.
You'll finish up. Wow.
Yes. And I like to do this in early September because everyone in Europe has gone back to work and it's a shoulder season. And so you can get lodging in Chamonix very reasonably.
Yeah.
And things are just less crowded.
Yeah.
But the weather is hopefully still nice.
Typically it is in August. I mean, in September, as long as I've come back to France, I don't remember when I was a kid, but, I've been back in France for 14 years now. And September is always lovely. It's always a really good time. I mean, this is mountain weather, so it's a little bit different, but... last time I was doing it towards the end of September, I think, and it started to have a bunch of rainy days in a row. Yeah.
So that was a little less fun. But for most of the 8 days I was hiking this, it was just perfect.
Mm-hmm. So what does it feel like doing this? Like day by day? Is it... I don't know. You tell me.
It's very physical, so you tend to be sore at the end of the day, and a glass of wine goes over very well to kind of ease that soreness. The nice thing is you'll rapidly find that there are other people who are essentially doing what you're doing. So within a day or two, you'll sort of have people on the trail that you run into that you recognize, and that's very enjoyable because you slog up some heavy hill and there's somebody at the top.
Right, cheering for you or something.
Yeah. So I met a lot of Australians. I met a lot of doctors for some reason. I met a lovely couple from North Carolina. He was a cardiologist and his wife, and they were super friendly and helpful to me. I met a couple brothers from Houston and Denver who were doing it. And, we kept bumping into each other, if not every day, every few days. So a lot of the time it's a long day and you're sore, but it feels good at the end of the day. And you're going to be, especially when you get to Switzerland, you're going to be eating a lot of cheese and potatoes and, tartiflette, raclette, roasty type stuff.
Yeah.
And it's amazing what you can eat when you're walking 10 or 12 miles a day. Yeah.
You're probably, eating 4,000 or 5,000 calories.
Exactly.
Yeah. And you need it.
Yes, but it's a very different sort of vibration from being on the Camino. The Camino is very much of a sort of spiritual pilgrimage, and even people like me who aren't very religious do it for a sort of spiritual level. The Tour du Mont Blanc tends to attract people who are more about hiking and climbing and things like that.
Yeah. But on this Tour du Mont Blanc, you don't really have to be a climber, right?
Right. I'd like to emphasize that if you're in good physical shape and you're used to doing some hiking, you'll be fine. The trails are quite well marked. They're wide. You're generally out of the trees, so you can see the trail going up the pass ahead of you. And you don't need any kind of crampons or ice axes or anything like that. You probably should bring hiking poles, even if you don't normally use them. I would bring a blister kit because you might get some blisters. Make sure you bring a good hydration system, whether that's bottles of water or a tube system. You'll need a hat, sunscreen, of course.
So is there water along the way or just at the refuge?
There are generally water fountains along the way where you can fill up your thing. I carried about 1.5 liters and that worked fine.
Okay.
And the water fountains will generally indicate if they're potable or non potable.
Right. Yeah, they have to say.
Yeah, if you're in doubt, just go to a cafe and ask them to fill up your thing for you, and they'll do it.
Yeah, that's
cool. So that's fine.
So you don't really need to bring like a big, heavy, 5-liter backpack with water or whatever.
No, I hiked with a 48-liter backpack, which had... I went to France for 3 weeks and this was just part of it. And I just carried everything, which was a bit of a mistake. So I ended up buying a ski boot bag in Courmayeur and sending that ahead of me. But what I would tell people to do is if you're doing other things than this, instead of trying to carry everything, just leave what you don't need in your hotel at Chamonix and you'll be back there in 10 days. And they're used to doing that. They'll put it in their luggage room for you.
Right. So long as you go back to the hotel.
Just carry what you need.
Yeah.
And that works well. And I found there are many hotels. Chamonix is a resort town, so there's tons of places to stay. But a good basic level, not expensive hotel was Hotel Le Chamonix. And it was right near the visitor center and had a cafe down below. And I think a room there in September at the time I did it was about 75 euros a night.
Mm-hmm. That's not too bad. So
No.
is this like a party thing? Because there are places in the mountains in France, in the Pyrenees anyway, where people hike just so they can go up there and share some wine and just be silly. Is it like that?
No, this is more physical than that, I would say. I did find that there were various alpine hiking clubs, and one time I came to a refugio at lunchtime, and there was 20 people sitting at picnic tables outside drinking wine in copious quantities and having a great time. But that was more the exception than the rule. And it may be, I did not stay in the huts, and people love that, but the one hut I had planned to stay in just didn't look good to me, so I ended up not doing that. And it was also the middle of the day, so I didn't really feel a need to stop.
Right.
But
so those are places where you share, like they have lots of mattresses and you and you share the room.
And you bunk down.
Right.
Yeah.
But do they give you like towels or pillows or blankets or anything like that?
No, as far as I know, they give you blankets. So one thing you'll want to take with you is I take a silk sleep sack. It's just like a silk sheet that's been sewn together. The one I have is from Sea to Summit. And that's a good thing to take anyway. And the reason you want to take it anyway, even if you're staying in hotels, is in Europe, a lot of the hotels will put the duvet in a cover and not give you a top sheet.
Yes, and then you're dying of heat.
Yeah, so you're either dying of heat or you have nothing covering you. And I found that this silk sleep sack solved that problem for me. So I was using it even in the hotels. Right.
You know, my husband, he goes to a lot of choir. He's a singer, so he goes to choir things. And so the whole choir is going to go. And sometimes they sleep in these accommodations that are not quite hotels. You know, they're like youth hostels almost. But he's gotten into the habit of bringing a big old comfortable king-size flat sheet. And then he just wraps himself in that and he's fine. You know, it doesn't matter where he's sleeping. He's not worried.
And the advantage of the sleep sack is that because it's silk, it's a lot lighter and it folds up smaller. So the other thing you probably want to bring is a little microfiber towel.
Yeah. Yeah,
those are really good. Handy for, those are really good and they don't weigh too much.
Right. And they dry fast.
Yeah, and they dry fast. Yeah, so those are the main things I would say. You need a puffy jacket, a warm hat probably is a good thing to have. You know, the sun at altitude can really crisp you up, and if you get a nasty sunburn, it's very unpleasant.
Yeah.
Let me suggest one or two other tricks that I found out. For instance, after Refugio Elisabetta, if you walk down to the nearest bar, it was easy to get a taxi over to Courmayeur. But I also had reasonable luck just walking into a bar and asking the owner if he knew if anyone was going to town. And then, you know, oftentimes someone came up for a coffee or something and they're going back to town anyway, and they'll happily give you a ride.
That's nice. Well, would you speak French? So yes, but, that helps.
You know, most people in the hospitality business, you'll be able to figure it out.
Yeah.
The other thing I figured out that worked well for me is that I liked Courmayeur quite a lot. And what you could do is you could do the stage after Courmayeur, walk that whole day, and then walk down to the side of the valley, and there was a little town with a bar, and I caught a ride back from there, but there was also bus service back to Courmayeur. So basically, instead of carrying all my stuff, I could just carry a day pack and do that day's stage. And then the next morning, I took a bus all the way up the valley and resumed and went on.
Do you have a map of your walk on your site?
Yeah, I think one of the pictures I sent you has a picture of the of a bulletin board with the map laid out.
Let's see. Ah, yes, I see it.
Yes, and there's a lot of stuff online if you Google Tour du Mont Blanc. And I've just sent you links to all the guidebooks, and I thought you could probably
put those up.
Put them to your Amazon link and put them on there.
Yep, I will do that.
My suggestion to people would be to buy the Cicerone guide, Tour of Mont Blanc by Kev Reynolds is kind of the standard guide. And then the other one I really like because it's a flip chart and it has a nice map layout is called Explore the Tour du Mont Blanc, the Tour of Mont Blanc by Gareth McCormick.
Okay.
And it's in the rucksack readers thing. And that one's well laid out. And if you get those two, you'll have a good sense of it. What's confusing a little bit is there are a lot of alternate trails that do more or less the same things that you can take. And when you're reading the guides, it gets a little confusing because there are different options. But I would say on the ground, you'll find it's fairly straightforward.
Right. And you probably have other people who want to do the same thing you want to do. So if you talk to them, you know, this is the way to this. And because you probably have like side hikes you could do to go see something cool and come back.
Yes, and there are side loops that take you to a particular refugio. And so if you want to go and stay the night there, you do a little longer walk, take the night there, and then rejoin the main trail the next day sort of thing.
Are there a lot of roads where cars have access or not so much?
Some, you know, when you come into town, you're often walking on a trail alongside the road,
right?
You know, separated from the road, but near the road in the town. And then as you go up the col, there's often a road that will go up to the refugio so that they can stock it.
Right.
But that road is restricted generally to the vehicles restocking the refugio. So you can see there's a road, but it's not got cars on it so much.
Right.
Maybe some farm vehicles. There's a lot of farming going on. You'll hear a lot of cowbells going on. You'll look across the valley and see herds of cows grazing, things like that.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, you took some lovely pictures. It looks very...
pictures came out pretty well.
Yeah, bucolic. And there's some pictures where there's obviously a lot of snow. So did you walk in snow some of the time?
Generally not. The trail was generally below the snow line. Every so often there'd be snow on the side of the trail. But at the time I went, remember it was September, so probably the last snow hadn't happened since June. But I would imagine that if you went at the end of June or, you know, the last week of June, you might be crossing some snow. When I called Chamonix this year to ask if I could start in June, they basically said they had a huge snow year last year and that they didn't really think things would be open until the beginning of July. Right. So remember that if you're going to start in June or July, you may want to check that things are open, because my guess is that you'll be able to do a lot of it, but there may be certain sections that are a little sticky. Yeah.
So this is the question that just popped into my head, but how do you know how this compares to the Appalachian Trail?
They're different animals because this is what we call a supported hike, or in bicycle parlance, a credit card tour, meaning you really don't need to carry very much because you can land almost every day and even for lunch in a place where you can eat.
Yeah.
And the Appalachian Trail is unsupported, so you go for as many as 10 or 12 days with nothing. So you have to carry all your food and all your lodging.
Yeah.
This you can really do quite lightly, and if you're really studious, I mean, I would always carry some food because if you get stuck out for whatever reason, you want to have something to eat.
Right.
But, you know, I was quite happy with essentially a chunk of local sausage and some cheese, and that went for 3 or 4 days, and then I got some more.
Right.
But a lot of times I would come to a hut at lunchtime, and they would have the menus at the huts tend to be fairly simple, and they tend to be offering only a few things, but you could typically get a bowl of stew and a glass of wine for not too much money, and that would tide you over to get to dinner. So I would also recommend bringing whatever your favorite kinds of energy bars are, because sometimes about 2 p.m. when you're dragging, having an energy bar or some M&Ms or something really picks you up.
Yeah, yeah. So one of the things you mentioned it already, but let's go over it again. This business of just hiking a few sections or skipping sections if you're not feeling well or whatever.
Right. So obviously some sections are going to be easier to shortcut than others. So there are 3 sections right around Chamonix that are going to be quite easy to do by staying based in Chamonix. What you can do is Chamonix has great transit up the valley, and you can take the transit up the valley almost to Argentière and take the lift up from La Tour and do a section there. If you look at the map, it'll be obvious, but essentially you can do a day section there that links you to another lift that brings you down. And then the next day you could go back to that lift and do another. So you could do 3 sections out of Chamonix and not have to leave, not have to change hotels.
Wow. But these would include the harder sections that you were mentioning earlier.
Actually, those 3 sections are not too hard. One of them has some ladders you can opt into if you want to. But those 3 are what are called balcony sections, which means they go along the valley above Chamonix looking down into the valley.
That would be cool.
And they're the Grand Balcon Sud. And I didn't actually do 2 of those because it was just fogged in and raining, and there was just no point in doing a balcony section if you can't see anything.
Right. You're
so
the second person who's
easy.
been on the podcast who said that.
Yeah.
They meant to, and then they just didn't do it. It was
so
foggy.
I'm hoping to do that this time. I can report back in September.
Right.
The other section that's easy to do is to do the section out of Courmayeur to Refugio Bonatti, have a meal at Bonatti, then you can walk down the hill and you're on the bus line or at a cafe where you can be taken back to Courmayeur. There's also buses between La Fouille and Champex. That section I wouldn't skip because it's the easiest section and it's beautiful, but there's not a lot of altitude gain, so it's very relaxed. And Champex is on a little lake in Switzerland. It's beautiful.
How do you spell that?
It's a lovely little place. Champex.
Champex, okay.
It's a Lac Champex.
Oh, it's a lake, okay.
Yeah.
Very nice.
And there's a nice hotel there. And La Fouille has a nice hotel called the Edelweiss, run by a very strict Swiss lady who runs a tight ship. Everything's crisp white sheets and a good restaurant, and don't dare walk in there with your boots on.
That's great.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you're never far away anyway. Like, somebody like me, I like to hike, but I'm not anywhere near that type of fitness. So I could probably do a little bit of it. And it would reassure me if I knew that, you can give up and get back to Chamonix easily.
Yeah. So what I would recommend for you is you do a few of those balcony trails out of Chamonix, and then you could do the section from the top of the Bellevue lift in Les Houches to Les Contamines Montjoie. And then if you had enough, you could, I'm sure, a bus or taxi back from Montjoie to Chamonix. The section where you can't really do anything is from Les Contamines to Les Chapieux, and that's the roughest day of the tour, and it was a rugged day. And when you get up in there, short of calling for a helicopter, you're going to have to finish.
Right.
And Les Chapieux doesn't have much. So figure that if you're going there, you're probably walking the next day to Courmayeur.
Right.
But most of the other sections, you're in a town. After Champex, you end up at a place called La Col du Forclaz, and there's a wonderful hotel at the top of this pass that's obviously been there forever. It's very dark wood and creaky, and it kind of rambles. And, your bathroom will be down the hall, even if you have a private room. But it was wonderful, and it had a great restaurant. And my understanding was that Madame, who owned and ran the hotel, worked in the kitchen, even though she was 80-something years old.
Oh, one of those, yes.
And and it was just terrific. That was my favorite hotel of the place, even though it was creaky and old, and it really had character.
I know a place like that in the Pyrenees, where the
Do tell.
Yeah, well, it's called Fougaron, and it's an l'auberge de Fougaron, but it's pretty low. You wouldn't use it maybe it depends where you're hiking to or from, but they do have l'auberge de Fougaron has an old lady. She's probably pushing 90 by now, and she still fixes lunch.
That's
it's
great.
Impressive. Yeah, it's very impressive.
So if you want to dabble in the huts, the nicest looking hut that I saw was Refugio Bonatti, which is a day out of Courmayeur. So that would be one that to me looked quite luxurious.
And they can sleep how many?
It really just depends on the place. But if you look in the guidebooks, it tells you how many common beds there are and how many private rooms there are. Mm-hmm. So if you're really on the stick, you can try to reserve a private room. I didn't have a lot of luck with that, but it is
because
possible.
they were booked?
Yeah, because they were booked. Mm-hmm. But there is a variance, and the refugios will typically serve one sort of dinner meal, and, it's a place to sleep. It's not a fancy hotel.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, it's okay. And they have hot water. I mean, you can take a shower, right?
Yep, I think you can take a shower, get clean. They definitely have wine. They usually have great terraces where you can sit out and look at the view.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're quite nice.
That's the life.
Yeah, I found what I ended up using the refugios was for eating lunch usually, and then I ended up sleeping in the towns, and that worked well for me.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So did you do this by yourself, or did you go with friends, or?
I did. I just went on my own, and it was fine, and, I met a bunch of people and ended up sharing meals with them, usually in the evening. One thing you find out pretty quickly is that when you're walking, you really need to walk your own pace or you're likely to sort of injure yourself. So I met up with a doctor and his wife from North Carolina quite frequently, but they would go roaring off in the morning at 100 miles an hour. And I would just kind of do my own thing. But at the end of the day, we would end up pretty much in the same place. I'd get there an hour after they did, but it didn't really matter.
So you walked between 8 and 12 miles per day?
Yes, typically. Obviously, some days are longer than others. The longest day is that Contamine to Montjoie, where you go up 4,000 feet and down 3,000 feet. And that is a really long day by any measure. Mm-hmm. But some of the days are more mellow. I would say that almost every single day felt like a solid day. It never felt like, oh, well, that was easy. It always felt like, well, that was a solid day.
Yeah, that was work.
Yeah. So do make sure, if you're planning to do this, make sure that you do some stair climbing or hill climbing, whatever is convenient for you, before you show up. Mm-hmm. And make sure your boots are comfortable. Make sure your pack is comfortable. Those are the things that if you don't get right, you'll be miserable.
Right. So in your outline, you have final words where you talk about things that are important. Let's get to those because.
Okay. So final words. You definitely want to avoid wearing jeans because when jeans get wet, they stay wet.
Yeah.
Get some nylon hiking pants. My personal preference is the zip-off kind because you can quickly turn them into shorts.
Yep.
You can also wash them in a sink and hang them up and put them back on the next morning, which is a handy feature. Mm-hmm. You'll definitely want some good rain gear. Mm-hmm. And then I always tell people you really want to have travel insurance. And I want to be clear, you don't want the kind that comes with your airline ticket, because if you read the fine print of that basically covers your luggage and trip interruption. For this kind of trip, what you need is something that has an evacuation policy and also has major medical. Mm-hmm. And there are all kinds of sites online that you can search different policies. I like squaremouth.com or insuremytrip.com. Mm-hmm. And you might look at World Nomads as another one. Mm-hmm. But make sure it covers you while you're hiking and make sure that it has major medical and evacuation. Chances are you'll never need it, but if you do, it'll be a good thing to have.
My husband and I, we just get this travel insurance year round because it's not that much more than getting it for 3 weeks or whatever. You're going to pay a couple $100 for the year and you're going to pay $180 for 3 weeks. So that way we don't have to think about it. We just have it.
Excellent advice. And I carry a Travel Guard business traveler policy. That's a year-round policy, and it was about $250 for a year. Right.
It's really not that much. In France, you buy this sort of thing through your bank, typically. But in America, it's your banks don't sell these types of products, do they?
No, you're going to end up doing this online.
Yeah.
The other place where you can do it in person is your AAA office.
Yeah.
But the thing I want people to understand that they don't always understand is that you want to make sure you're covering medical and evacuation.
Right. Because you need
things like trip cancellation and lost baggage are relatively minor compared to what you can run into if you injure yourself.
Yeah. And you want to be able to just tell your your doctor, because obviously if you injure yourself, you're going to be seen by doctors in France, and that's fine. But you probably want to get home. If you need surgery or something, I don't know. I'd be more comfortable doing that at home.
Right,
myself,
exactly.
Which home is France for me, but it's what's comfortable.
Yeah.
It's what's comfortable.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then I do recommend taking the lifts up on the Courmayeur side. There's the Heilbronner lift that takes you way up, and on the Chamonix side, the Aiguille du Midi is fantastic. It's well worth going up there. Mm-hmm. There can be a line and things like that, so you'll have to figure out when to go.
But maybe do it once you've been on the mountain for a few days.
Yeah.
Maybe do it at the end.
I didn't find it too oppressive. It was about a 20 or 30 minute wait to get up there. It wasn't too bad. And then another thing you can do in Chamonix that's a lot of fun is you can rent a mountain bike and do various trails. And there's all kinds of rental places in town. Mm-hmm. There are day hikes, as we talked about, from Chamonix. When I was there, the train to the Mer de Glace was unfortunately closed, so I didn't get to do that. But that's one of the great attractions in Chamonix.
Yeah, was it because, why? Why was it closed?
I think they were having to fix the tracks and stuff, and so it was just after their big season.
Right, renovations.
I expect to do that this year. Mm-hmm. Also, something that I loved, and it won't be for everyone, but in English we call it paragliding. In French it's parapente.
Parapente, yes.
Where you do a tandem jump and you can go off various heights depending how much you want to spend.
Yeah.
But basically there's a midpoint going up to the Aiguille du Midi, and you can do a jump from there and basically sail over the Chamonix Valley and land in the town park. Mm-hmm. And I did that, and it was very enjoyable. Mm-hmm. And there's a little bit of a video on my blog that you can watch if you want. But if that appeals to you, I sort of set that up the day before or maybe the day of, and it wasn't too big a deal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. So you don't need to reserve that months in advance.
No.
Not
at all.
I mean, there's a lot of people like me who would never do that. So even people who would go hiking don't necessarily want to do that. So
no, but it's an option.
Yeah. And how much does it cost, more or less?
I think that it was about 200 and something euros, 220 maybe for that. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And basically there's a guy strapped behind you, and there's this little moment of truth where he's behind you with the kite and you're all strapped in, and he kind of says, okay, run off that cliff. And you go, oh, really?
Really? Huh?
But after that, it's fine.
See, I could never do that. I'm such a chicken.
Yeah, that was a little bit of a moment of truth there.
Yeah. I always talk to people who are much braver than I am. But that's good. I mean, that's not, and even the money, it's worth the money if it's not something you're ever going to forget. So
yeah, and if you have the time, I kind of put about 2 weeks into this thing, and the actual hiking was maybe 8 days of it. Uh-huh. And what I ended up doing was, when I realized I would have some extra days, I just booked, a day or two before a Airbnb in Chamonix, mm-hmm. and that worked out wonderfully, and it wasn't very expensive, and it was a brand new apartment that was sort of right in the middle of town.
Yeah.
And it was very, very pleasant. And
that's probably on your website, right?
Yeah.
The specifics.
Well, I'm not sure if that one is still available or not. But
that's true. They come and go.
Yeah, but you can find Airbnbs. Try to be right in the middle of town. Mm-hmm. And this next trip, I'm renting one for some friends and it's a 2-bedroom, 2-bath. And I think it was in September, at least, I think it was in the neighborhood of about $150 a night. So
that's not bad at all.
Not bad for 2 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms.
And I'm looking at your photos, and I like them, and I encourage people to go check out the show notes for this episode, because they're very lovely. But there's nothing quite like a long walk, and then you see your chalet or the place where you're gonna sit and have a drink, and it's such a good feeling. That's yeah.
It really is. Yes. Yeah. Let me suggest, when you're in Chamonix, the restaurant that I kept going back to that I really liked was Atmosphere, right by the post office in Chamonix.
Why? What was so good about it?
It was good French food, and they had an atrium that hung over the river that runs through town.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and it was just well done, delicious. It's definitely not the cheapest place to eat, but I felt like it was good.
It's good to know about these places because in a place like Chamonix that's fairly touristy, no, very, very touristy, there's probably a lot of run-of-the-mill places that aren't any good. So...
Yes, that one was quite good. I found 2 or 3 that were quite good to great.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, do you have... is the name of your blog, is it something you can say and people will remember it maybe, or should I just put a link to it in the show notes?
Sure. The main link to all of my different adventures is tangonomad.wordpress.com.
Yeah, Tango Nomad.
Yeah, and the first entry of that will sort of have a list of all sub-adventures, and that way you don't have to wade through all kinds of irrelevant stuff.
Right.
So look at the first entry of that. The tangonomad.wordpress.com is actually started as my Camino blog, but I've since added blogs for other things. If you're interested in bicycling across Normandy, the Velo Scenic blog is there, which becomes tangonomadvelo.wordpress.com.
Okay.
And there's a bunch of links on there. My goal in doing this is to have other people read the blog and say, gee, I could do that, and then to provide them with the resources so that they can figure out how to do it on their own.
Right. So, and it's also kind of inspiration.
Yeah. And so each of the blogs, if you look, sometimes the format is better on a regular computer than on a phone or on a tablet. But each of the blogs will usually have a separate page on the side that lists the hotels and the restaurants and things like that.
Right.
So that should help you find the things you need. On the Tour du Mont Blanc blog, there's a page that says, so you want to do the Tour du Mont Blanc, and it has stage suggestions, hotel suggestions, and
That's cool.
distances and things like that.
That's really cool. That's very helpful because you've gone through it and you can put your own perspective on it. It's better than just looking at maps. I mean, maps don't talk to you. You do, so that's good.
Yeah, exactly.
That's great. All right. Any last words of wisdom that you want to share?
No, my suggestion is to go and give it a try, and you can always pivot and do something different if it ends up being too much, but I think you'll absolutely love it. And I have every intention of going back and doing some of the trails I didn't do last time. I'll be back in a month and do some more stuff. And then it turns out there's another tour like the Tour du Mont Blanc that isn't as well known called the Tour du Combin or something. And Brittany at alpadventuresunguided.com will arrange for that, and it's much less known because there's almost no material in English about it. So if this sounds like your cup of tea, but you want to avoid the masses, that might be an option for you.
That's cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that. I hope lots of people will check it out. I think active vacations are some of the best things you can do in any country, to tell you the truth, because you'll remember a lot more. It's going to be more of the experience. You know, you'll feel it in your bones and maybe in your feet. And it'll be good for you. You
really have the sense of the terroir if you walk it.
Yes.
That's for sure.
You see every inch and you either love it or hate it right at that moment, but then as soon as you're done, you like it. So yeah, it's kind of the weird love-hate relationship that I have anyway with hikes. Is you're like, oh, when is this gonna end? And then I'm telling you, like when I'm within a kilometer of my goal for the day, I'm so happy. Like this is like elation like nothing else.
Absolutely.
So,
and Annie, thank you so much for doing these podcasts. I'm going after Chamonix this trip in September. I'm planning to go down to Avignon and maybe to Nice and maybe to Marseille. And so I'm searching through your episodes to put on my phone. And when I'm out walking, I'm almost always listening to a Join Us in France episode. Oh,
that's wonderful. That's good to know. And for me, it's inspiration too. It's like, you know, I mean, as I see it, we only have one life. So we might as well just make the most of it. and hiking.
Words of wisdom.
Yeah, and hiking and things like that. Even if you don't do anything that taxing physically, which is more my case, but I just still like to get out there and see the world and not be in my own bubble constantly, because that's just, it drives you insane after a while.
Yes.
Lacklan, thank you very much. Have yourself a wonderful rest of the day in Honolulu. You know, this is one place in the world where I've never been. I'm yet to go.
Okay, well, let me know when you're going to be here, and we'll try to hook you up with people.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
And thank you for having me on, and thanks for doing what you do. And if you need clarification on anything or, further follow-up,
sure,
email me or call me, or happy to do it.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Bon, merci, Annie.
Au revoir. Merci à toi.
Alors, à bientôt.
À bientôt. Thank you, Eric Mitchell, Donita Porter, Robbie Nunley, and Aaron Brown for pledging to support the show on Patreon this week. And my thanks to all the other patrons who support the show month after month. Thank you for giving back. To support the show on Patreon, go to patreon.com/join us. Patreon. Join us with no spaces or dashes or anything. I'm so grateful to the patrons and the positive feedback they give me. I published a new Patreon reward yesterday. It's an episode of the French History Brief about food in medieval France. I think it's really interesting to hear about how the things we eat have changed so much over time in the same country. And about this reward, Dorothy Bushel said, "The new patron extra today was quite interesting. Please support her here. It's just $5 a month, more than worth her work for this group." Thank you, Dorothy. And actually, you can support for as little as $2 a month. All the other reactions were very positive as well, as they always are. The patrons I have love the extras, and I do put a lot of work into those as well as into the podcast. I have a big goal of reaching 200 patrons by December 31st, 2018. If I do, I will be ecstatic, and if I don't, I will draw the lessons and make some changes. I've produced 206 episodes that have been listened to almost 800,000 times. That's a lot of people listening to the show. Not 800,000 people. Most individuals listen to at least 10 episodes. Some even go back and listen to all of them. But still, 800,000 listens. There are a lot of listeners out there. Each week, I tell you the names of new patrons because I want them to know how grateful I am for their support. But what I never tell you is that each week I gain some patrons and I lose some patrons. Last week, I told you on the episode that I had 129 patrons, and this week I have 132. So I gained 4, but I lost 1. Why does that happen? Well, people had their trip and they move on. I get that. That's really, really not the issue. I am not asking for your support forever. I understand that you can't do that. Just while you're getting ready for your trip and greedily listening to all the episodes that you can, because you know it's good stuff and you are learning the important stuff for your trip. So I know there are some obstacles to you doing this. You have to go to patreon.com/join us and you have to sign up. It'll only take a couple of minutes, but still it's something you have to do, something extra in your busy life. And you're probably driving or exercising, or maybe it's, you can't do it right this minute and you will forget. But I really make it easy for you. There's a link to Patreon in the show notes on your app, on your phone. There's also a link on every episode page. If you go to joinusinfrance.com/support, there's a big old banner for Patreon. So, if you don't support on Patreon, eventually, maybe it's just that you don't want to. And if that's the case, I need to know that. I'll keep beating the drum and asking for your support, but if I don't reach my 200 patron supporters by December 31st, 2018, I will draw conclusions and make some changes. I'm not there yet, so, we shall see. Up next for patrons is the explanation of why the Rosetta Stone is in London and not in Paris. Elise and I talked about Figeac and the Rosetta Stone in episode 143, But it took a lot more digging to figure out why it's a Frenchman who deciphered the Rosetta Stone, and yet it's at the British Museum and not at the Louvre. So, yeah, I love doing that kind of research for patrons, and you'll get that in a couple of weeks. For my personal update this week, I had a really exciting weekend. I volunteered to take care of a guide dog who's in training for a few days. And it turned out that this 8-month-old dog is more of a pony than a dog. He's tall and long and 100 pounds already. But being so young, he gets excited and he wags his whole body with joy. You know how Labradors do that? They just wag the whole body. So trying to channel that in a house with 4 people, 2 other dogs and a cat was a bit of a challenge. But this dog, Newton, will make a great guide dog once he calms down. He's got all of the important stuff. He loves to learn and he's very, very obedient. So guide dogs are a work in progress. The young ones are sometimes a little bit goofy. And my own Gus, the rescue dog, who's only 17 pounds, was really happy to see Newton go. And Opie, the puppy, and she's pretty small herself. She's still under 40 pounds. She was so sad. She had a playmate who rolled her in the grass and bit her ears, and yet she misses him. Dogs are funny. Another thing that was exciting this week is that I was invited to be a guest on another podcast where I got to talk about me being over 50. Ooh. So if you want to hear me be myself and not talk about France necessarily, listen to Welcome to My Box, Chatterbox number 6. I'll put a link in the show notes so you can go straight to it on iTunes, but you can also listen on Facebook. Search for Welcome to My Box. Sergio and Lisa do a fabulous job, and it's one of these podcasts that I love to listen to when I just want something relaxing. Sometimes they're funny, sometimes they're profound, but they're always very entertaining. They got me swearing in both French and English, which you'll never hear on Join Us, and being a lot more open about my personal opinions than I am on this show. So it's called Welcome to My Box. Look them up. It was lovely being invited on their podcast. Thank you, and I'll keep listening to you guys. I got a fun email from VJ this week. VJ has come up on the show a few times. He's quite a character. He's been a patron of the show for a long time. His email says, "My department head told me that she wanted to do Christmas in Europe. I told her to consider France and in particular Paris. She has never traveled outside of the US. Of course, I turned her loose on the pod. I think she's devouring the episodes. Before listening to your pod, she was constantly asking questions of our experiences in Paris and France, but now I am getting a constant barrage of quizzes. Did you know that... ... I don't answer back by saying, yes, I listened to that episode. I know she's getting way braver since she wants to do a day trip to Strasbourg for their Christmas markets. Anyway, you have a new fan. And that's how you do it. That's how you can help keep a good thing going. Become a patron and tell other people. Make their experience better in France, help them get braver. You know, you can do that much for them. You can give them the tools that they need to say, oh, maybe I'll be in Paris. Maybe I could get on the TGV and go to Strasbourg for the day. Yes, they can, and they will love it. So thank you, VJ, for your support of the show and for sharing the show with other people. You are a gem. To connect with me, email Annie@joinusinfrance.com or leave a message at 1-801-806-1015. You can also ask to join the Join Us in France closed group on Facebook, but when you do, you have to answer the questions. Otherwise, it's an automatic decline. So I need to know you're not a spammer, and the group is growing very nicely, but if I let all these spammers in, I'll never do anything else besides deleting crap that they put on. Have a great week of trip planning, and I'll talk to you next week. Au revoir. The Join Us in France Travel Podcast is written and produced by Annie Sargent and copyright 2018 by Addicted to France. It is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license. you.